Today we're going to install the Firestone coil-rite air helper springs. The reason we are doing this is to help with towing. The 4Runner has a soft suspension, and when you tow, there's a lot of compression in the rear, and this can cause issues. And there are reports of people bending their hitch receiver when they use a leveling hitch. This is the airbag that's going to go inside the coil spring. So it'll be up in here, and it goes inside the spring, and when you fill this up with air, it stiffens up the suspension so you don't have as much sag. The instructions tell us that we need to remove the track bar here, remove the shock, and drop the rear axle so we can remove the spring to get to the bump stop, to cut that, and to install the air helper spring. Now, I read a review online that said this can be done without removing the spring and without dropping the axle. So we're going to try that method today. I spent some time looking for a walkthrough with that method and I couldn't find one, so that's why we're doing this video. The instructions say we have to cut the bump stop inside the spring. This is a little difficult because the spring's in the way, so you have to have a small saw or just a small blade and cut it. Luckily this is rubber, so we're able to cut it much more easily than if this was steel. You're going to cut on the first or the top groove here. You're going to leave one puck of rubber on top and cut the rest off. So the instructions have a great diagram, if you can see it here, of where to cut. So like I said, you leave one puck of rubber and then cut 4 off. So that's what we're going to do right now. So I'm going to count. On my 4Runner, there's actually, we have to get all the way up there. That's a lot of space. So we're gonna cut it out in pieces to make this much easier. Okay, after about 3 minutes of cutting, I was able to cut off the bottom puck. The reason we're removing it in pieces is because you have to slide it through the spring, and that's what comes off. So this cut moderately well. I used a drywall saw, and once I got a little bit of space in between, I then switched to a utility blade and a utility knife, and the cutting went much easier. So now I'm going to do the same thing and remove the next pucks. I have now removed the bump stop, so you can see I have 1, 2, 3, 4 pucks removed of the bump stop. These were up there. I had to cut each one off separately because I did not remove the spring. Now, cutting the bump stop will be a lot easier if you remove the spring like the instructions say. But I didn't want to deal with that, and so I cut each one. I found using a utility knife was the easiest way. It was much easier than the saw I was using initially. It cut very well, and it only took me less than a half an hour to cut all of this out. And then jacking up the rear end made a big difference because now I can fit these easily in and out in between the springs where I couldn't before. The next step is to install the air hose. Now this hose is pretty rigid, so it makes it hard to work with. Some people might like to upgrade this. I might do that in the future, but right now I'm just going to use the parts that it came with. On the reviews I read, many people installed it in the bottom, which is fairly easy. As you can see, I already have it through the bottom. If I can find the end. Come in from the other side, it'll be easier to thread it. So through the bottom, I'm already threaded. You can see I have the end here. Now, this is fine for everyday driving. It's fine if you don't take this off-road because you don't have to worry about wheel travel. Now, I disagree with putting it through the bottom like this because if you take it off-road like I do, when you do that, now when my tire drops, I have to have a lot more slack in this hose to allow the axle to drop. And if I do that, I can catch it on things, in the end, what's going to happen is I'm going to break the air hose. So we are going to have to go through the top. Now, since we were lazy and didn't drop the axle, this is also a little more difficult because we just don't have a lot of space. But I'm installing it from this side because if we tried to go from the top, the hole is the same size as this air. The existing hole is the same size as the air hose, and so it is extremely difficult to thread it from the other direction. And there's not a lot of space to work with, but you can get your hand up there. And since I'm starting on this direction, I have to thread all of this hose through, which does make it more difficult, but it made it much easier to thread. So I am now through. I'm just gonna feed the air hose through. And while I'm feeding it through, I'm actually going to route it where I want it to go. Now make sure you avoid exhaust, make sure you avoid hot spots. Luckily on the driver's side, there is nothing hot on this side, so it makes it a lot easier to route. And now that that is routed, we are going to install the airbag now. Now this part is also difficult. You have to be able to compress it and slide it through. And I'm going to install, I'll rotate this so you can kind of see. I'm going to install the air hose right now, because once it's in place, I'm not going to be able to install it. And the air hose is just, according to the instructions, is just a push fit. I'm going to double check. It just says insert the airline tubing into the push connect fitting on the air spring as far as possible. So we are just going to push it as far as it will go. And that should be it. That easy. So now, when I'm installing this air spring, sliding it through, I'm going to slowly feed the wire, or the air hose, trying not to kink it, which is pert near impossible. There we go. So this was a lot harder than I had expected. It doesn't compress very well, but it can be done. So I just squished it through, and it required a lot of pushing and pulling and compressing and twisting, but with work you can get it. And it's in there really well. And the reason I routed, now we can really see the reason why I routed the air hose through the top. Because now when I get this air hose secure, when my wheel drops, my air spring will just stay at the top and the air hose won't get compressed, nothing will happen. The air hose is strong enough to hold it in place, and then I don't have to worry about excess. I don't have to worry about excess air hose and leaving too much slack, because it'll just stay at the top nice and easy. So this is how you install the air helper spring here. And another nice thing is, even off-road, this will compress when the tire goes up. So we'll keep you posted on how well it does off-road as well. But for right now, I'm actually very happy with how this looks. And pretty soon I'm going to lower the vehicle and we'll start connecting the air fitting on the other end. There is the airbag installed. It's actually a perfect fit in my vehicle. I have the 2-inch Toytec Lift, and so my springs are 2 inches taller than the stock spring. So I had to buy a different airbag than what is recommended for this vehicle. So but it looks like it's a perfect fit. It fits nicely with it without any air. And now it's time to hook up the air hose to the air fittings on the other side. Okay, on the passenger side, the track bar mount right here is in the way, and so there's not as much room to access what we're getting into. So I ended up taking off the passenger side rear tire so I can get in access right here. It makes it much easier to get in and cut off the bump stop. And one word of caution, make sure you're using jack stands, don't just use a jack. I have a jack stand both on the frame to hold the frame up, and then I have a jack stand under the axle to hold the axle up. That way, the risk of the vehicle falling on you is really low when you're underneath it. So using my utility knife, I am cutting off the rest of the bump stop. That's enough. We don't need to watch me just cut this whole thing because it takes freaking forever. All right, now we have the bump stops all cut out. So we're gonna, once again, we're gonna thread the air hose through the top. So let me climb underneath the vehicle and do that. All right, once you get it through, this one will have to be routed differently because the exhaust is on this side. From my plan, I think I'm going to route it just above the frame, but we'll have to see when I actually get in there. Okay, now we're going to install the passenger side airbag. This is a pain because there's not as much space on this side as there was on the driver's side. Now, I recommend going into the second to bottom space on the spring. If you go in the bottom space, you can't get your hand underneath to force the airbag up. And as you can see, it's really difficult and tight. And it's actually would be nice to have an extra set of hands to be able to help push and pull. So if you can have two people doing this, it would make it a lot easier. I'm not going to record the whole thing because it takes forever, but you can kind of get an idea of what you do. All right, this is kind of the middle section. When I'm putting it in, I can't get the top to go up because it's too wide. And so I end up sliding the bottom in, and then I start working the corners through to get it to go up and down. So this is kind of how I did it. It's not easy, it's a lot of work, but if you keep at it, you will get it. Okay, as you keep working it, it'll slowly stretch out. One thing you can do because if you notice, well, that other bump stop's in the way. Let me move my camera. So here, I can't get it straightened out because this piece right there is sticking out into the spring. So one trick you can do is, sorry about shaking the camera, is you can twist. As you twist it, it lengthens out and then it'll pop into place. Just like that. So now I'm going to install the valve so you can inflate it. Now I'm installing it right here underneath the tailgate. The reason I chose this spot was for a few reasons. One was when this is right here and the tailgate's closed, you don't see it and it's hidden, so it's nice and clean. The reason I chose here versus over here is it's just easier to get to from underneath. But I've seen people where they install it right here instead of here. Either way's fine. I just thought this one was easier to get to. And so now I'm going to go underneath and I'm going to install it. So you take off the nut and you have this. Let's get it in focus. You have this piece. Make sure you have a washer on. And then you go underneath and slide it up. And just so you know, the size of hole I used for this was a 5/16 drill bit. And as you can see, the 5/16 drill bit was nice because it fits so well that it just kind of holds in place. and it was a tight fit, but it's not too tight, so it's just perfect. And now I'm going to tighten it up. It is a 12 millimeter socket. And there you have it. And just so you can see, it still closes. Oops. Helps if my wrench isn't in the way. It closes nicely. And it's hidden. Okay, so the airbag is installed and inflated. So you can see it's actually pretty tight. I can't bend it or flex it much at all. And I routed the cable through the top. Now there's a sleeve that comes with the kit like this. I have this sleeve on the wire, on the air hose, going across the bend where it has the most rub. And then I came over the frame. I'm trying to stay as far away from the exhaust as possible. And then I actually followed this wire there across the spare tire mount over, and then I have it plugged in over there. So that's how I routed the passenger side of the airbag. Okay, so this is the driver's side airbag, and it is also completely installed. As you can see, I routed the blue air hose over that cross member there, and then I went all the way over and went under the bumper and connected it there. So this is inflated, and just so you know, when you install this, the airbag will be a little bit shorter than what you expect it to be. But when you inflate it, it will expand and fill the whole space. So this is how it's supposed to be. And now let's go try it out. Now that I have finished, I wanted to share a few pointers with you to make this easier. To start off, the spare tire is in the way a little bit. You don't have to remove it, but it's easy to remove, and if you take it off, you will have more space to get underneath and move around. So I recommend removing the spare tire. This is the driver's side. If you notice, there's a lot of room to get into it, so you're able to get in and get this done. I do recommend lifting the frame or jacking the frame up so you lengthen out the spring. This gives you more space to cut out the bump stops and gives you more space to slide the airbag in. The passenger side, on the other hand, does not have as much space. You can see there is the track bar mount right there by the exhaust. The track bar mount is in the way. That makes it much harder to get in and cut the bump stop off and to put the airbag in. So I recommend removing the passenger rear tire to give you more room to maneuver in there. This is difficult to do because of the lack of space, so it might be easier to follow the instructions instead of doing this alternate method. So you can watch this video to decide if you like the method of not removing the axle and the spring, or you can watch the instructions on how to do it while following the instructions and decide which method you want to do. Okay, now it is time to test out. This is not loaded. I'm at 39.5 inches in the rear, and in the front I am at just under 38. It's 38 or 37 3/4 in the front. So now I'm going to load the trailer. We'll see how much sag I have, and then I will turn on the airbags. Okay, so this is with the trailer loaded on the back of the hitch. This trailer has a tongue weight of about 400 pounds. I don't have a lot of sag in the rear. I went down to 38 exactly, and up front I am at almost 38.5. And this is without a weight distribution hitch. So this is with 30 psi. I've gone up to 38.5 in the rear. And 38.5 up front.